Okay, we've continued the movement. This is the hardest part of the game when you're coming up on Super Tuesday and you got to try to allocate everything. We had polling performed by the Bush camp this time, largely to see, hey, could we just buy South Carolina? Well, we can't, but we can buy second place, and that's worth a couple bucks and a partial pass, you know, although we are playing in Nevada as well, so we're really not too worried about South Carolina. And that's why everybody's ignoring South Carolina, is because of its position and the way the game handles things. The thing this game is missing, and the game that has it, the only game that has it, I think, well, now Campaign Manager, I think, has something similar. But Candidate, the old Avalon Hill game, you know, real Avalon Hill games are old, right? It's not all that old, actually, for an Avalon Hill game. Has this idea of bandwagon, which gives you power as you start winning. So if you win, you know, elections, if you win the most electoral votes in a set of elections, you get to the bandwagon marker, and that gives you more cards, so you're stronger going into the next set of elections. And I feel like that's something that's missing here. There's the you're just screwed aspect, which tries to capture some of that, but it really doesn't capture kind of the steamroller of the bandwagon effect. It's not absolute. In fact, I find Candidate ends up far too split up. Too many people are sitting on way too many delegates. Generally, these elections, nearly all of the delegates are going to a couple of frontrunners, and that's it. And we may end up seeing that. We'll see. So this is a complicated one because we've actually, not comparatively, but for what we've had before, we've got both Washington and South Carolina. And Bush doing his. This is the advantage of going last, of course, is so you get to just say, okay, well, I'll do a poll, I find out what everybody has, and then I buy the states I want. This wasn't a terribly valuable poll, but he had a lot of hard money, and he still does. He has 18 bucks. Nobody has that much. And he's pretty high in the dark money. Fiorena's close. Cruz is way ahead, but Cruz has trouble capitalizing it because he doesn't have the hard money. Anyway, he's not having problems, let's put it that way. Bush is having some serious problems here. So what we have is, let's look at Washington. And this is going to be a proportional. So we have 10, 50, 64. This isn't going to be easy. 50 plus 24 plus, looks like 65. Okay, so we have a 139 base. Now, I'm not going to worry about these guys back here, but 40 divided by 139 is going to be 0.28. Washington has 12. Which means that's going to be 3 votes over here in the Cruz camp. We knew he had big points there. Oh, geez, I can't remember the number. It was like 138. 24 divided by 138 times 12 is 2 votes for Fiorina. 55 divided by 138 times 12 is going to be 4 votes for Rubio. Looks like he's going to take Washington. And now let's see. 10 divided by 138 is times 12 is not a vote. So 7, 8, 9, 3 more votes go over into the Rubio camp. What we see here is Rubio pulls in is 55. Rubio gets 7. Cruz got kind of screwed out of this one, actually. Has 3, and Fiorina has 2. Okay. And we'll lock these guys with their totals there. Bush has an amount worth thinking about, at least. Yeah, actually, a lot of them do. All right, well, cube everyone. It doesn't really make much difference. Okay, so that's where we are. And let's take a look at the other state, which is South Carolina. Now, everybody's going to get their buck out of Washington. South Carolina's a little bit crappier because this is a P+. So if anybody exceeded 50%, they get all the votes. And that's 9 votes for Cruz. Okay. But that 9 votes isn't the only factor in play. Bush is getting $2 for that. Which means in 2 turns, I'll get 1. Okay. So Cruz gets $4. Bush gets 3. And the rest are just going to pull 1. You know, which is where Bush kind of got to slip in there at the end and seeing nobody else put any money in that. And that's what the polling did him, really. Okay. And I'll update the vote totals here for February 3rd. So what did we get? Rubio got an additional 7. Which puts him to 8. Cruz got an additional 12. And Fiorina got 2. And the rest I'm not going to worry about. Okay. And that pushes us forward 1 more. The chits that are there, there's different ways you can represent it, but the way I've got it represented, at the end of the turn they get discarded. And I don't know if the rules specifically state that you should do it that way. But yeah, that's where we're sitting, and we're going into, now it's just Nevada caucuses. Now everybody's more or less filled out their caucuses. I think there's a couple of missing ones. But the problem is all these primaries. And if you don't finish in the top 3 in pretty much all of them, you know, you're allowed to get away. You're allowed to have 2 passes. You take 2 passes here, and then you must come in the top 3 over here, or you're going to just be screwed out of it. Now, we'll see. We'll see. A little bit about the event deck, and I think that's actually some of the problem here. Well, some of the timing problem. There's timing problem between players too, but hey, that could be a baked-in advantage to certain candidates. Most notably, Trump should have made it so that he was last, but I'm okay with what we ended up with. And I knew that before I played, that the first player should go last. The first highest charisma should go last. Seating order then becomes important, right? You know, and that's kind of goofy too. It's not like you sit in opposite charisma order or anything. But the event deck coming up on die rolls, the players that their pawns are making, right? The U.S. political process might have some effect on events, but I don't think the number of candidates and the number of surrogates working for those candidates is a particularly strong indicator of how fast and hard events are going to come. And that's exactly what the game does. Now, in terms of the game, it breaks the primary caucuses situation every now and then, because an event happens partway through the turnaround, which is not really a temporal existence. So any events should be drawn at the beginning of the turn and just take effect then. And that would ease some timing questions as to placement of chips and stuff like that as well. The problem with that, of course, is when that beginning or end of turn. When that happens is kind of interesting because it does affect when people select these. And I don't have an answer right now, and I'm not going to change the way I'm playing. But it's one more modification I would try to make to the game to make it a little more realistic. One of the problems with this game is they took what was a fairly simple and not unrealistic design, not detailed though, and blew it up to try to make this detailed, ultra realistic game. And as often happens when you do that, when you just paste onto what looks like a kind of neat system, it doesn't quite work. Let's see, Jim Muser. Yeah. And, you know, Bromley's experienced, but I don't know if he's terribly experienced with trying to look into how realistic something is. You know, what he probably saw was, this is still a fun game to play the way it was. I think it would be possible to make a few modifications to the game. I'm not worrying about the individual candidates that I've got, but and still have a playable and fun game that much more accurately represents the history. And I think we're kind of beginning to, you know, I cleaned up some of the things that really bugged me, and now I'm cleaning up some others. But it is still going to be a heavier burden. But if you don't like the heavier burden, why not play Campaign Trail instead? You know, I've been playing this wrong. It's losing grants is not from getting no electoral votes. It's from getting no votes. No point. They use the word votes for the points that you have in here, which, whatever. So, we actually do not have, you still don't get money in primaries, in matching, if you don't come in first, second, or third, right? Oh, third or lower get a buck. Okay. So, I've been screwing this up completely. It's only if you don't get anything positive in 3 or more in a row. So, I owe people some additional money, which I have to track over here. So, for example, Rubio isn't the only one who gets one. All the rest get a buck. So, I owe everybody a buck. Yeah. So, it is a lot easier to keep your matching money as long as you don't really try, you know, to lose it. So Trump is currently spending his advertising trying to make sure that he gets into enough states. This mounting a significant challenge here to Cruz in Texas. During his term, cultural diversity became an issue that got rid of civil rights? No, that can't be right. No, it got rid of finance. Removing finance hurts a number of people, but the cultural diversity makes Trump a monster here. He's, you know, going to start calling people all kind of names, and it's going to work. But actually, no, it's not what should have gone. I didn't see labor relations was here. So finance, geez, I don't remember where it was. I'll put it here because I think that's where it was. Instead, labor relations disappeared. Which is bad, worse for Cruz. Cruz had the pro-oil company effects in certain places. It's hard to tell though, because, you know, where you want to campaign because of the issue may not match at all what's going on here, which is an interesting thing, because especially if you design your own character, you find yourself in a position where you're trying to design a character who's going to have the right issues to win the campaign, but you don't know when those issues are going to come up and be important, and how well they're going to correspond to the issues that you need in place for the primaries and caucuses that you're looking at. But yeah, Carson's blast into Texas is really putting a threat on Cruz. If Cruz does, and he may, a poll, he's going to find out he's actually behind there. Now, the problem is if Cruz goes in there, he can blast a whole bunch of points too, especially if he waits till this turn. And Cruz is kind of counting on first in Texas as a big part of his. That's what's going to keep him going. Now, he's getting, you know, he's got a strong position across the board, I would say. But if we look at, yeah, he's in the lead right now. So, you know, chances are he's going to walk out of Super Tuesday in pretty good shape anyway. But if he can make this the death of Carson, essentially, because Carson decided to fight him here, that would be really cool, because Cruz is probably not going to drop out of the running very quickly. On the other hand, Carson's probably not either, so they're kind of making it into a death match there. I pay attention to the news usually a day late, and it's kind of interesting because Trump has been ratcheting things up since I started this, right? Yeah, he's always been kind of anti-immigrant. Well, he's obviously always been anti-immigrant, which gave him the big anti-Hispanics. Anti-ethnics, well, certainly he had an anti-Muslim bent, but it didn't seem that heavy. Now it has gone to, wow, that should be probably a 6 now, and he's been posting some, you know, false crime statistics that even Bill O'Reilly calls him on. And he should probably have the anti-black values there. I don't know what to do. In a way, this is the problem of Trump, which is that there is no stance that you can really evaluate. It's almost like his issues will just change to whatever he wants them to be, to whatever he thinks will satisfy his base. He's so mutable. In a way, it's the spin doctor gone crazy, because he can pretty much say anything, right? Now, he probably won't reverse what he says, usually. But if you tried to evaluate Trump, say, you know, a couple of years ago, obviously there's a significant difference. But if you try to evaluate him today, next week his values might be more extreme. And I really don't know what to do. I mean, can I, in the midst of the campaign that I've got here, bump up some of his stats and just have an effect on things? I guess. I mean, that's what the spin doctor does, but the spin doctor doesn't really describe how that'll handle, you know, the auto-created type stuff. I'm not sure that would apply. But on the other hand, I'm not sure why it shouldn't. Why statements he makes shouldn't have the effect that they would had they been kind of known beforehand. And that's kind of a weird situation. Is in particular that I mean is when you're creating a candidate, so if you take an anti-black stance, if you had this all along, at the beginning you would get all these. Now what if you shifted your stance to anti-black? Or pro-black for that matter also comes with a pile of different, well, no, these are not automatics. So these just show up at the beginning of the game normally. Now if your rating changes with the spin doctor, I don't believe, don't forget to, oh no, it does, it is supposed to affect in real time. Yeah, I almost feel like that's what Trump has, is like this huge swath of spin doctor points. I haven't been giving him, you know, I haven't considered that before, but now that I see how his reactions are, you know, but it's not like he's reacting to an issue. In this case, for example, it's the Black Lives Matter protesters coming to him. He's always said he would play hardball with them if they came. And, you know, then he gets into some hot water about saying, you know, maybe the guy was rude enough he deserved getting roughed up. Well, okay. Understandably, you get in hot water for that. But once he's committed down that path, no, he's not going to retract. He's never going to say he's sorry. He'll just drive his view more in that direction. It was a popular view among his supporters anyway, and now he's enhancing that popularity. Building up as a demagogue, essentially. And this game doesn't handle that kind of character. This game handles, you know, the kind of politics that existed really since FDR era. Because prior to FDR, you had guys like Huey Long who were doing that kind of crap too. For Super Tuesdays continuing, but there was one big event that came up, which is an oil spill. Terrible for Cruz, not great for Rubio, obviously, but moved to the wrong piece. Cruz ended up just getting blasted and everything in the Deep South. He's actually negative in, you know, key areas that he was counting on winning, campaigning pretty heavily, and he got wiped out in Georgia. There's no way to rebuild this. I mean, you know, these are points that he thought he had in the bank, and they're just gone. He lost 3 times his rating. Now, this is pro-oil and exploit oceans added up to 12 for him. Triple that is 36. This is in Alabama itself, 36. Double that because it's coming close to the primary, puts it to 72. So he lost 72 votes there. That's his worst case. He's at negative 31 now. He had invested heavily there. And in many of the surrounding states where he's wiped out, places like Louisiana, you know, maybe he can compete in one of them, but he's just not going to rock the way he'd expected to. And I don't see many points in any of them coming up. A lot of people throwing their dark money into the game here still, of course. The actual election in Nevada, even though it was a big issue and for Rubio in Nevada, this oil spill, what's weird is it doesn't happen in a location. You know, it's not like a big spill in the Gulf, which affects everybody in the Gulf. Instead, and then maybe nationally as well, which it probably would. It just affects you centralized where you are. Again, the events, maybe they're balanced for gameplay or something, but in terms of a realism thing, they just never strike me as feeling terribly reasonable. I forgot to have a debate here, but it probably didn't matter. You don't have to have one. Both sides can ignore it. So we'll just do that. But Rubio probably wanted the debate. He has no real bonuses right now when it happened, but you know, both sides probably wanted it because then they can channel the points through, you know, whoever wins gets an advantage over everyone. Whoever loses might be risking something, though. But anyway, the win over in Nevada went, Carson got 4 votes, Cruz got 2, so now we're at 15 for Cruz, 10 for Carson, and they're in the lead at this point. But we're going into Super Tuesday. And this is the big turn. And you know, once this is out of the way, the game starts getting a lot easier. This is just such a headache because you have to make sure you collect votes and everything. I thought you had to make sure you win and everything, and I was going to say, well, you know, if you're placing in the top 3, that's impossible. You know, in the primaries, no, you just have to get you have to get positive votes and everything. Now, there are people who are going to have trouble getting positive votes and everything. Cruz has to make sure that he doesn't get wiped out because of the horrible event. But in general, yeah, nobody gets knocked out in this game, even with the primaries and caucuses. I think maybe I was considering, hey, if you don't make your matching values in the primary states, and that's where I got that idea that it played that way. But I just don't buy that, you know. My feeling is actually maybe not out of 3. But, you know, if in any given week you don't place, I don't know how to put it, you know, because, like, not placing in the top few in Nevada is probably mildly important. But on Super Tuesday, the chances are that you need to win some of those to get any kind of bonus. And I'd really have to define some new mechanisms to handle the matching funds in a way that works a little better. Much as I've devised other things for this game, but that's the problem. You really have to patch together a whole lot. There's promise to this game. There's a lot of promise in terms of accuracy, right? In terms of gameplay, it's kind of cool anyway. I don't know if you want to add the optional rules as they are, but they do add some interest. There is definitely some interest to adding the primaries and caucuses to the game, because it kind of makes it so that you're not just, oh yeah, okay, here are the states I need to win. Let me grab those. That'll put me in, you know, the top couple, and then I'll try to make sure that I get second place in a couple of big states or something that'll put me over the top when, you know, my opponent falls. That kind of thinking that unfortunately works in a lot of the games, and it's kind of cool, but it's absolutely anti-realistic, right? Well, this one makes this big attempt, and trying to figure out a way to make it work so it's more accurate and actually depict something at all realistic is just so hard. But it does try to come closer than almost any other of the generics. Now, the specific games, so obviously, look, and I'll get to this at some point soon, Campaign Manager actually does a really good job of its selection. 1960, I think, does a pretty damn good job of its election. It's harder for me to tell with something like Tammany Hall. Divided Republic didn't really feel terribly correct, and Bull Moose, maybe if you knock out some of the characters, yeah, but there was too much of an attempt to balance the game so that the person, you know, if Debs gets, you know, 10% of the vote, that should be like a victory for him. He shouldn't have a chance of winning the presidency, and that shouldn't really be the player's goal. His goal is to try to establish a socialist party, right? Anyway, this one is just part of the reason that it intrigues me, that it pulls me back to it, is that it is so good at this. The problem is, even with the basic rules, it's a fairly painful game to solo, because there's so much record keeping and so much kind of secrecy in terms of you want to be able to play polls, etc., to find out about other people's stuff, that you're left losing a lot of that flavor that you really kind of want. That flavor's not there in the CDG games, for example, or in Campaign Manager, really, because everything's kind of out in the open. You know what you're doing there. And that may actually be more realistic. You know what states you're doing well in, which you're doing poorly in. What's really nice about Campaign Manager is that it works off the principle of there are only certain states in play, but that's very modern. And certainly not really an aspect in the primary elections. And I like these open primary games in a lot of ways, because they allow multiplayer and they allow for a more fluid situation. Well, we're up to Bush. He's the last one on Super Tuesday here. But before we get to that, it looks like Obamacare did well or something. Yeah, I know. This is the 90s version. But what happened was the people who I gave the anti-socialized medicine position to got hit by that ×5 in their current state, ×2 in adjacent states. That really hit Carson and, again, more than anyone else, Cruz, who now got wiped out in this area. Not as badly. He doesn't have that big an anti-Obamacare stance anymore. Nobody's really, you know, they all want to repeal it, but nobody's as strongly against it as they were, say, 2 years ago. So, it's kind of a mellow situation, so I only gave him, say, I think a 2 rating on it. But yeah, that undermines their position, and both of them are in danger of not having positive votes in 3 states. There's no question about that. This is a serious issue even in a multiplayer game, playing with the primaries and caucuses. Unless you have some kind of time limit on people's turns, what they're going to do is they're going to, and you can't really because of the polling and stuff, they're going to run a poll, see where they're ahead, where they could possibly catch, and then they try to optimize what their, advertising strategy is and everything. And honestly, player turns take, up to maybe 10 to 20 minutes each on these really horrible periods. Later in the game, it also gets tough because maybe you have a decent amount of cash. Now, the dark money, of course, makes it worse because there's a whole bunch of that kicking around. But, usually, although honestly, primaries and caucuses flood the game with more money and make a lot more of this decision making. Also, they make it important to make sure you win certain states so you get more money for later states, etc. So not only do they generate money, but they also raise the stakes to the point where you're making these kind of calculations all the time. In the basic game, it's really not that tough. Usually people don't poll until very late in the game. And then, hey, did I win? But that doesn't model a primary season at all. Whereas this does a really, a much better job of it. Not a good job, but a much better job of it. But it just adds to the burdens. Now, when you start adding the, hey, do I get a proportional representation of the votes and stuff like that? Wow. Playing with these mods in a multiplayer, it would just be killer in terms of the effort involved. What might work is something with this kind of model over the computer, kind of, over Vassal or whatever. But the problem is, you could build a much, much better pure computer interface for players to play an election in real time, where they're kind of plotting their actions ahead of time. Maybe they can find out where somebody's going and then schedule a meeting to be right next to them, the way Clinton did with, well, really with Trump, actually, just to kind of make that, really underline the, hey, here's an experienced person versus the front runner, and what a joke he is. In the base game, we have a situation that's happening as I'm slowly working through this, and this is probably going to take me an hour and a half to go through Super Tuesday's vote count. As I'm working through this, I got to worry about the money that they're collecting, as well as the votes that they're collecting everywhere. Actually, I'm pretty far through North Dakota already. But North Dakota is an interesting case where everybody has 2 votes. Now, in the normal game, when that happens, you roll dice and you see who won the tie or whatever. I'm not going to do that here because most of these states do have a possibility for deadlock. And when it can happen, what really ends up happening is you don't end up with any committed delegates. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, but we think it's going to probably end up as an all or nothing, which it would be normally. But there's no committed delegates. Basically, no one, when they tried to get the votes, it ended up deadlocking, whatever. And so the state is thrown into, legal turmoil and all kind of other situations. And what we're going to do with that is, if anybody really wants the points, they just have to score the highest at the end of the game. It's just going to be an uncommitted state at this point, which is kind of an interesting situation. But that's just how I'm fudging it. I don't know if North Dakota can do that, but I know some states end up in that situation where they end up deadlocked. More interesting point is the negative votes. So, for example, Cruz has negative in Oklahoma. That's going to actually throw him off the ballot, even though he may end up with the most electoral votes out of this. Basically, the idea is that some kind of screw-up totally has hit him, and it may not make sense because, like I said, you're not going to end up not getting matching funds under normal conditions when you're winning a bunch of states. In fact, pretty much if you've got any electoral votes, you probably keep getting your matching funds. They only get dropped off when your polls go down to nothing. It doesn't have anything to do. There's just no way it would happen here. But we're going to say some kind of mechanism got into play, and he's going to have to fight his way out of it now. Which means I don't have to worry about the cash he's collecting here. But anyway, the negative votes I'm not adding into the proportioning because they would screw everything up. So only the positive votes. So for example, here, I'm going to take 58, 64, 68 votes. Now, the 58 is obviously going to take everything anyway, even if it's not a winner-take-all. This is a P+, so it goes to 50%, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. But if I was apportioning these votes, I wouldn't take into account the negative votes because they would essentially, if somebody had a big negative, they would be getting negative electoral votes out of that process that would end up padding other people's votes. And it just doesn't make sense. It's only out of the positive votes that it can possibly make sense. Just as one of those little on-the-fly things I had to notice, and it's pretty obvious what you need to do about it. Carson, too, almost failed. He actually came up with 2 failures here. Cruz's 3 failures, though, means no money for him, and it's big money that he's being left out of. So, for example, Carson's got the least money coming in at 17. Bush has 25 bucks coming in. That's going to be huge. However, and it may be enough to decide the game that Cruz is no longer in it. But that's hard to justify because Cruz is sitting at 90 electoral votes and no one else is anywhere near him. Fiorina is at 34. Trump, Bush start putting up some real numbers on the board. Same with Fiorina, really. This is the big, this was the big day. And I don't know what, how to justify this, what happened. There's probably some legal fight or something that froze his account. And it may have to do, with illegal contributions or something like that, some kind of challenge to his dark money. Who knows what happened? The mechanism of the game doesn't make sense. There's no way that you win those kind of electoral votes. Even if there are states that hate you and that didn't vote for you, that you would be thrown out of the legal matching funds. And here's another thing. These funds may not mean legal matching funds. But the point is, those big negative, the reason is, yes, back in 92 or whatever, people took their matching funds, and that was a significant part of their fundraising capabilities, as well as small donors that were coming in, etc., which I think this also represents. But here's the biggie. This may also represent other forms of fundraising that are just coming through, and that success is breeding this extra money, etc. However it works, I don't think the game mechanism is representing things correctly no matter what. But in this case, it's quite possible that the Cruz fundraising operations were found to be, in some kind of terrible crime being committed here, and they're being frozen and investigated. And the fact is, unless he can get back on his feet from that and show that even under these circumstances he can still start winning states, people might simply not be willing to invest in new continue investing in Trump. He may have just been, or in Cruz. He may just have been so tarnished by whatever this is. So we'll take it as a scandal and illegal activity or something like that. Although I'm pretty damn sure Cruz is probably the least likely to get caught in something like that. He probably plays close to the edge, but he probably is pretty damn aware of where that edge is. I would say someone like Carson is actually probably in more danger. You just have no idea, what kind of advice he has, what kind of real campaign he has. And anyway, This gives us an idea of where we are now. Now, next month is nowhere near as bad. We're looking at still bigger than we've been looking at, but only 4 states. And what is it? I know I looked it up before. First or second in 2 consecutive primaries. Well, we have 3 primaries here. If I can place in the first 2 in all of them, I'm fine. I'm back in the money. But no matter what, I lost the biggest money generating turn in the game off of this, and that's going to be pretty devastating. If it weren't for the fact that Cruz is sitting here with a commanding lead, this would be the end of the line for him, and he would probably be withdrawing from the race. Given the nature of the campaign that we've seen unfold so far in real life, none of the candidates that I have portrayed here, I think, qualify as anti-war. Trump might have at one point, certainly with his Putin and ISIS fight it out, seemed a little bit more along those lines. But now with the bomb the shit out of them, I just can't give him this. And everyone else has really taken a militaristic stance. So everyone would be disallowed from that, which is kind of a shame. If we had, Rand Paul in it, he's not really anti-war, but he's the only one out of the Republican caucus who seems to really hold anything like an anti-militaristic view at this moment. And we're past this moment here, right? All right. Newcomers were able to take advantage of earlier goers. Rubio went into Mississippi, and Cruz went and beat up Trump over in Michigan really hard. And likewise, Bush tried to get an advantage on Cruz, but I don't think that worked much. That's in follow-up states, Illinois and Missouri, which are coming up next month. Cruz, I think, pulled the most with 9, but Fiorina with 8. And money-wise, of course, Cruz was locked out. Even though he got a win in Michigan, big state, it still isn't going to help him at all. He's got to win 3 in a row. He's got to place in, what is it, 2 or 3? I can't remember. I keep forgetting this one thing. 2 consecutive. So he's got to take 2 in a row, but judged as poorly as possible, which probably means until we get kind of where there are only a couple of primaries in each. Now, he could have done it here. He just would have had to win all 3 or place close in all 3. That didn't look possible. So let's see what we had here. Mississippi went Rubio 4, Carson 2. Michigan, Cruz 9, Trump 6, Carson 1. Idaho, I believe, went straight ticket Fiorina, as did Hawaii. Hawaii, I think. Hawaii was no. We have hybrids coming up. Both Missouri and Illinois are hybrids. What that's going to mean is half, rounded up, is going to be apportioned proportionally. The other half is going to be apportioned, is just going to go to the winner. And I'm not going to give it the winner-take-all bonus there. I don't think that that's what I want to. Yeah, it's just a straight P rather than a P+. So that should work pretty well there. We'll push forward with with the polling. The last time I did a poll, and Bush may do one again this next turn, I just spent $1 and said, you know what, the states I'm interested in cost less than 100, and I'm just really interested in the states that are running right now. I exclude Texas from that, but he wasn't interested. So I didn't I didn't fill it out fully, which means other people aren't going to have the same amount of information, but that's okay. I kind of start fuzzying it since I'm playing solo anyway. One other issue that I see as kind of disturbing in the game is you can slap down a huge organization all at once and then throw your advertising money into it or go visit it with a big rating or something, and just boom, you take a state all at once like that. And that's absolutely not appropriate. The way organizations are built is over time. Essentially, you'd be filtering money in over a period of time, building up your ground game in various states a few months before you have to face the primary at the least, right? You know, and that's what's not effectively represented here. What it should be is a time commitment. And I'm not quite sure how you do this. Again, a computer game would handle it so much better. Where, yeah, okay, I'm going to devote $10 into there this turn. That doesn't give me an organization yet, but if I devote, you know, a certain amount of money over a certain amount of time, I've set up an organization that's just going to crank out votes. It's probably not going to, the multiplier factor seems a little strange. What it really should be is you're kind of like the cubes that you use in 1960 or the other games, should represent your organizational capacity in the state. And you just build it up over time, and it's building up votes over that time. Now those votes can be taken away though, but it's almost like that's how you get votes, and that's how you get the organization. And it just, whether or not the multiplier makes tremendous sense, you know, maybe it does if you score big points on a certain kind of thing, but I don't think, I think it more paves the way preparing for a candidate visit or something like that. And just the dynamics of this whole thing just don't quite work. Like the fundraising that is the primary effort of the year before, well, okay, you know, maybe that's baked into the candidate building process, and you can start off with some organizations, but they just don't start with them in the right places. Like everybody should start off with Iowa, New Hampshire, probably South Carolina. Just and you know, it's not a matter of, oh, well, I built my character stupidly. It's not really that so much as I'm following what the feel of their pre-baked characters are. They don't have those organizations in the early states particularly. Of course, those characters may be built more with an eye on the basic game rather than the primary and caucus game. But I just feel like there are so many things that really need changing in a serious way. But geez, you know, remembering all the factors that are at play from issues, etc. I think screwed things up last time, or I screwed things up, not being able to remember. Because I think Cruz went in and hit Trump. Cruz had, I don't remember what he was working off of, but something that involved the anti-banks position here on the finance, which isn't a huge position for him, but I forgot completely that Trump is sitting on his anti-Hispanics and anti-ethnics ratings, so he has a +8 in debate. We'll just mark that up to he stumbled somehow or whatever, but wow. Anyway, here we are ready to start, what, third week in March. Florida, Illinois, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio. Because of Cruz's problems, he did get a big bonus here. He got $9 because of his pro-oil rating. Although, honestly, if these problems were as bad as they sound like they are, you should just be like, yeah, I'm not donating to him even. But because of his problems, he's not getting any dark money from that. But he's pretty wealthy in dark money. In fact, he's the wealthiest. So, He doesn't really need that. What he needed, he needs to win 3 states. And it's kind of funny because he set himself up without thinking too hard about the next turn in such a situation where he'd be able to swamp your Illinois, Missouri with his votes. But when I looked at the votes there's 2 things in play. One is I can't win 3 of these, and I can pad either side. In fact, I probably can't win any of them. They're all hard for me. Well, North Carolina is going to be mine. I have like 80 votes there. I don't know if anybody's going to challenge that. But I'll be in the first 2. 2 people aren't going to challenge it. But what I saw is the next race, Arizona, Utah, and then Wisconsin. I think I can win those if I start now. And so I'm spending money on priority flights to get to different places. This guy can actually get into Wisconsin, so I'm not going to spend on him. I'm going to leave a guy for fundraising. And I think, I built up some orgs, and I'm just going to go chase into those and see whether I can get back into the money race. It kind of doesn't matter because this was the big money turn, but there you have it. About ready to start counting, but my wife wants to go play Dominion with me, so I can't do that. But finished up the cycle of turns. There was a little bookkeeping error where I think some decisions were for Bush were poorly made, but it all worked out in the end because I caught it before anything came too badly of it. But he did he did a poll, and to find out where everybody stood in the current primaries that are running right now, and then in Utah, which is coming off that, and was able to make some determinations like I have no chance of winning Florida because it's a winner-take-all state, and I'm in second place. Same kind of decisions in some other places where he could like boost his vote points a little bit. I don't remember which one he chunked his way up in. But he was already built up for this Missouri-Illinois combination and ended up getting kind of a crappy role and ending up in a crappy city in Illinois, which is a pity because a kind of nice event came up. 2 events came up. Defense became the active issue, which is good for him and Rubio. And then this pro-foreign aid thing, which hurt Trump and helped them. And again, what's kind of weird here, the ideology of the states is less important than your strategy of how you manipulate your candidate and get them to campaign places. And that's kind of one of the things that really irks me about it, So for example, there are certain candidates who just would not have a chance, even in this era, because of their ideology. They're in the wrong state. They would skip that state. And that's why people sometimes didn't go to the South Carolina primary, or people sometimes choose not to go to the Iowa caucuses, is they say, well, this state is too extreme in one direction or another. I have a chance at the overall vote, but I don't have a chance there. And you don't get that here. All you get here really is issues can improve your standing. Somebody could be very good at a state, but if they don't go there, if they don't actually press some flesh there, they're not going to get any votes in general. There's automatic assignments and such not. And otherwise, it's kind of where your candidate's centered. So like this foreign aid thing, it doesn't affect them across the country as it would. And these are the kinds of things that I feel the whole game would need a real reworking, because the core of the system, the event deck, is a big part of it. Another part of the game that needs reworking is the timing factor, the player turn timing. Really, the design that didn't work too poorly for Campaign Trail for the GDW game just wasn't ready to be expanded. And, it's the same kind of thinking that makes me kind of grump about A World at War, which I did recently, which is it took the old Third Reich system and just kept bolting things onto it until it got richer and richer. And for me, Advanced Third Reich worked out. A World at War is just pushing it a little too far. But that's the kind of process that I feel like has to happen here. And what's worse is that there are key components of that process, the I go, you go nature of the game, that just are fundamentally against what the campaign is like. And those kind of things probably just don't really reflect well, no matter how you handle things. Most election games, most of the U.S. election games that I have that kind of problem where you're throwing a huge effort, essentially, in very limited places. Even Mr. President, which I really enjoy, it feels like you have this either, oh yeah, I'm going to devote myself heavily by playing a card there, or no, I'll just ignore it. And maybe the other guy ignores it too. It's a small state and I've got the edge there. Or, yeah, I'll throw one card. Yeah. It doesn't feel like the proper situation. It doesn't feel like it really reflects the elections at all. And I'm not quite sure how to capture that, but certainly I've not seen it in any of the games. Even the ones that I kind of like 1960, don't really feel like they carry that kind of thing. The personal campaigning becomes too big a portion of it. To me, the personal campaigning is probably an edge factor. Maybe I'm misjudging most people, but I don't think somebody is going to be likely to switch from supporting Hillary Clinton to supporting Bernie Sanders, or supporting, Donald Trump to supporting John Kasich if he shows up. I just don't think that's going to be the primary thing. I think the primary thing is really national debates and how the issues resonate among the population, how the character presents himself, how the candidate himself presents himself, and these other things. And you become very inclined towards that candidate. Ground game can get you moving, can get your vote out. Personal appearances, to me, they're the slightest, tiniest edge. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's this magical transference when you meet someone. I know that the few candidates that I've ever met, including guys like John McCain and such not, I've really just kind of, if anything, not been impressed. I've been if anything, it's reduced my evaluation of them. Now, I'm sure things are different when you're in New Hampshire or Iowa, but I think in most states that personal touch is probably pretty damn unimportant. And after the March 3 turn, I can capture each of the states in terms of value. The big shock here was really Trump, who managed to pull off Ohio with very few votes, honestly. Everybody stayed away, maybe because of fear of his debate prowess or whatever. But everybody stayed out of Ohio, and he managed to get that with like 40 votes and 18 points in the only state that he took here. Others, Cruz had North Carolina taken away from him by Bush. Now, this is the huge advantage of being the guy going last, which is probably, if you're playing, if you're playing with the primaries and caucuses, it's really an unfair advantage, because you can poll, find out exactly what everybody else has, and then throw your points in there, and nobody can touch them. I'm not sure that there's any way to, maintain the majority of the mechanisms that this game provides and still get away with anything. It's basically, the advanced game just makes it so terrible as a simulation. And the basic game isn't really simulating and isn't really trying to. So it's really the flaw to it. The base game is kind of fun to play. The advanced game is a lot more of a headache and provides, if anything, a worse simulation value. Anyway, what we're at right now, and obviously I've tinkered with it, which may or may not improve the simulation value. But what we're seeing here in terms of the turn ordering and the primaries and caucuses, how big a deal is that? Well, the fact that I freeze the electoral college, that I actually commit those delegates legally to the votes that they have, which most states do, is a part of the problem here. Because otherwise, you could run up the score in the voting, get a little extra money off of it, but you're not running up your electoral score definitely, which is to say that other players could come in, throw some more votes in. So again, the more you try to focus this game in and make it more correct, the more you start seeing that there are other things in the base design that aren't able to hold the weight of that. And I suspect that's what happened in the design process. One of the guys over at the Game Box mentioned he was playtesting this, gave them some advice, and they kind of ignored it, and then dropped him from the playtest credits. And you know, honestly, I'm not sure about dropping someone from the credits, but I can see why they chose to ignore advice to make it clearer, because they may have tried going down some of those paths and seen, oh no, that actually really breaks the game. The unfortunate thing is there is this feeling that they were trying to aim towards a little bit more of an accurate simulation. And just everything that you start seeing as you try to work down that path says, okay, I got to start changing things up. The thing is, I can actually see from what I'm playing this time, this is the most depth that I've gone into in terms of modifying the game to try to get some level of realism in it. And everything looks like it can still be fixed. I feel like after this play, okay, I could play it again and I could try to arrange a different turn ordering mechanism where nobody's got that guaranteed advantage, or where if there is such an advantage, maybe it's bid for. Maybe you have to buy the turns. I could see tweaking things and playing with them. Like I said, with the events, they probably should all be generated at the beginning of the turn. Polls, if you changed the turn order so everybody did their spending before everybody did their actual moves, that would change things too. So it would be a much, much lesser advantage to going last. And just all of these different factors that come into play. So there are definitely fixes in sight for what I'm looking at. It's just, I get the feeling that there's a better underlying framework that could be used to represent electoral politics. And in fact, maybe one that could be used in a more generic basis that, see, this is hard because the events and the issues you're associated with become really key. They're kind of like the stats in a status pro game, you know. Well, I'm playing the 1980 season, and that's great. You know, I've got all the players from 1980. But I should just be able to translate the player cards from 1980 and bring the 1927 season in and have about the same game, you know, have just different players because their stats fit that. That may work fine for that design. It doesn't work here because the game's changed too much, right? The game of politics has changed too much. And it's really kind of akin to when I play, taking that baseball game metaphor, when I play, I don't remember what it's called, not Out of the Park, which apparently allows you to configure all this, Baseball Mogul, I think it is, or something like that, where the business rules of baseball have changed, free agency, stuff like that, and those are not reflected properly by the game system, nor really is the era of the ball, like whether you're playing with dead ball or not. These things are just not adequately reflected in it, but you could see where they could be tweaked because they haven't changed the rules of baseball itself, right? You know, so you just have to change that little module. Well, here, unfortunately, the underlying module to the design involves these events and the issues, and they become core to it, that you'd have to rewrite them to face the particular error. But also, you know, when the primaries and caucuses happen, where money comes from, how it's generated, you know, what limits there are on it, all that kind of stuff is all different from when this game was designed. So trying to modernize it seems difficult, but the problem is also this never represented the reality. Anyway, I don't know why I'm babbling off on that edge, except that I'm a very lonely person who likes to talk to the camera. Let's end this up.